Well, now that we've had a chance to try out a few of these basics with some blocks and some text, let's try this out with some real website-looking content. I've got another file down in here called Tryout Layout, and let's open that up. Now here we've got a title, what looks like a little menu, a couple of paragraphs, and a footer. And they appear to just be sitting right on top of each other. So let's go open this up in our text application. And here we can see what we've got to work with. Down in the body tag, I have a header section with my H1 tag in it for a title. I have a nav section with a paragraph that represents my menu item selection. Notice these don't have any anchor tags on them, so they're just text right now. And they're just separated onto different lines using a typical line break tag. Down below that, we've got a couple of section tags, and inside those sections, we've got some paragraphs. And of course, at the bottom, we've just got a little footer. Now, what I'd like to do is arrange all these sections using what we've learned in our previous examples. Now, there are lots of different strategies you can use to stack the elements on your page, so I'm really just showing you one example. But I like to start from the top down. And what I'd like to do first is deal with the entire content on the page. Now, in general, the body tag is a grouping for everything that's on the page, but I like to keep that a little bit separate in my documents, and I'll just group all the items together inside the body tag using a standard div block. I'll add a div tag here at the top, and then I'll go all the way down to the bottom, and right before the end body tag, I'll put in an end div tag. Now, since there's so much space between the start and the end of this div, I always like to leave myself a little note so I know where this one's coming from. I'll add the characters we need for a comment. We've got that less than sign, an exclamation point and 2 dashes. That starts out our comment. And I'll just put in here end of page div. We'll close off that comment so that that will be ignored by our browser for the code. And let's go back up to the top and set this div up. I'm going to need to identify it. And in the past, we've used classes for this, but I can also use IDs, remember? So I'm going to set up an ID equals, and I'll just use the name page. Now, an ID tag can only appear once in the document. So here I'm really specifying that I'm only going to have one page. Now, of course, we need to set up our page style. So I'm going to go up to the style tags up here at the top. For an ID style, we use the # as a start, and we'll put in our style page. I'll add the braces, and we'll set up some style rules for it. Now, the first thing I'm thinking about is how my content's going to appear on a large screen. And generally, I don't want it to fill the whole page and float all the way out if somebody has a large monitor. So I'm going to set a width on our page div, and then we'll set auto margins on both edges so it'll center up. We'll put the width in first, and I'll set that for this example to 600 pixels. Always remember to put your measurements in there. If you just put a number in that's not 0, most browsers won't know what to do with it. Now we're also going to set up centering margins, so I'm going to use the margin property, and I'll just set that to auto. When you pair that with the width setting, we'll end up with a center-aligned page div. Let's save that, and we'll go back and take a look. Now you can see my content is only spanning 600 pixels now, and the auto margin setting is equal spacing it from the edges of my browser page. So even if I resize the page, it's going to be centered and 600 pixels wide. Next, let's take a look at the top element. Our page has a header here with a title in it, and since that's already got its own grouping, I'd like to set up a style for the header tag. I'll go right above the ID tag that we did before, and I'll add in a selector for the header tag. We'll add in our braces. And just so we can see how this looks, I'm going to set up a background color. I'll use the named colors since they're easy. I'll just put in a dark gray. We'll save that change. And now we can actually see that header block up here at the top. And let's give it a little bit of height so that it's not quite so squished in there. I'll just add in a quick height value. And we'll set that to something like 80 pixels. Refresh our page. Now we have something that looks a little bit more like a header. With the rest of the content, I'd like the navigation setting to be kind of in a column over here on the left-hand side, and I'd like the paragraphs to wrap up around the right to it. So what we can do is take this block here and float it left, and then we can take this block and float it left as well, and they'll be stacked up next to each other. Let's give that a try. Again, my navigation elements are already inside of a nav tag, so I'm going to use that as my grouping tag. We'll set up a selector for nav and some braces. Now the first thing is I'd like to give this a width so that we've controlled the edge where the wrapping is going to occur. So we'll set a width of something like 110 pixels. Now as I said, I want it to float left. And just for visual purposes, I'd like to align the elements in the center of that floated left block. So I'll add in a text align property and set that to center. Now we also want to float the other elements here, but if I look down on the page, you can see that that's two separate sections, so we can't use the section tag in this case. I'm going to add another div tag simply to group those sections together. So we'll add a div tag here. And since I used an ID property on my first one, I'll stay with that for the second one. I'll set this one to main content. And I'll close off that div tag right down below the last section. And next we can make a style rule for the main content ID. I'll go right below the page one that we created before. It's an ID, so we'll be using £, and it was called main content. I'll add in some braces. And we also wanted to set up a width on this one. Now, if our page width is 600 pixels and our nav is 110, I can subtract those and come up with 490 pixels for the width of the main content. And to position it, I want it to float left as well. Now we've set those up, I want to see what we've done, so I'm going to save our changes so far, and we'll go out and look at our page. You can see that we've got a 110 pixel block here on the left-hand side, and our text is centered up in it, so that looks a little bit more like a nav. And you can see that our two paragraphs are grouped together over here, and that block is floated left against the nav block that we set up earlier. Now I still want to clean up the copyright down here at the bottom, but before we do, let's take a little closer look at this set of blocks that we've put together up in here. We have some pretty tight math going on. We have exactly 600 pixels, and we have a 490 block sitting next to a 110 block. So everything works out just right. But you also have to remember that if we add in paddings and margin, those have to be added to our widths as well. Let's go back to our document over here, and let's suppose I wanted to add a little margin to my main content to push it away from the other elements. I could just go down in here into the main content block. I'll add in margin, and I only want to do it on the left and right. So let's use our shorthand notation. I'll set 0 for the top and bottom, and then I'll set 50 pixels, a really big margin for the left and right hand sides. We'll save that change. We'll go back out to our page and refresh, and we see something a little bit weird. We can see that our paragraphs have been pushed down below the navigation block, and you can also see that the copyright has flown all the way up here to the top instead of sitting at the bottom. Well, this does make sense if we think about the math. Originally everything fit, but now we have 110 pixels plus 490 pixels for the width of the content down here, plus 50 pixels on each side, which is an extra 100 pixels. Now that's too much to fit inside of our 600 pixel block up here at the top, so you can see that this element, the div containing our main content, has wrapped down below the nav section. And you can see that since both of these were floated left, that leaves our copyright to float all the way up to the top here. Now there are a lot of different ways you can fix this. For one, I could adjust the width to take into account the margins on the side. But generally what I like to do is separate out these settings so they don't affect each other quite so much. Let's go back to our document. And what I'm going to do is take the margins out of the main content area. Now, if I scroll down to where the main content is, you can see that inside that div, we have section tags and we also have paragraph tags. I could pick either one, but I'm going to use the section tags in this case. Since they're inside the div, they'll be using the div's width itself as a measurement. So let's go back up here to the top. I'll just go down below the nav, and I like to keep my tag selectors together, so I'm going to put section right there. We'll add in the braces, and for the rule, I'll paste in the margins that we set before. Let's save that change, and we'll go back and take a look at our page. Now you can see that my paragraphs are stacking just like they did, but we also have that 50 pixel margin on either side of them. By applying the margin settings to section tags, we're not affecting the measurement of the overall div itself, and that way I can keep my math a little bit easier.